one of the issues that you and I have been talking about is the BBC documentary that was pulled. I think a lot of people watching this show might have heard bits about that. It was about, the documentary about Gaza. But, what's a very basic, what's happened, basically?
This was a really interesting story. The BBC put out a documentary called Gaza, How to Survive a War. And they said that it was going to be a landmark documentary where children in Gaza told their story of the war that's been going on since the Hamas invasion of Israel on October the 7th. What happened was, as soon as they put it out, David Collier, a friend of mine, a brilliant investigative researcher, watched it. And he's done a lot of work debunking BBC bias on Israel. Within hours, he had traced the main narrator, a child called Abdullah, found out that A, he wasn't a new voice that had never been heard before. In fact, he'd been on Channel 4 News some months before, and that he was, in fact, the son of a senior Hamas minister in the government in Gaza. None of that was mentioned in the documentary. It took David less than one night to work that out through open source investigation on the internet. We're talking Facebook searches and his acknowledged expertise and knowledge of this subject. But to think that one man, expert or not on this topic, could do in one evening what an organization, a broadcaster, an institution like the BBC, with all the money and history and experience it has, couldn't have done in the many months it took making this film is absurd. And after that, there were other problems with it. I myself uncovered in a tweet I put out, a post on X, a thread, which at last look has 2 million impressions, because it revealed that, as well as that problem, there were other serious failings in the documentary. So in one sequence, they used another child called Zakaria, I'm not sure how you should say his name, and he was 10 or 11, and they showed him as a volunteer paramedic. He was helping the paramedics after what was said to be an Israeli airstrike. So they had one big caption, day whatever it was of the war. They said there's been an Israeli strike in the Burej camp. It's a part of Gaza, and all the casualties are being brought to the hospital. And this kid is helping them bring the casualties in. So far, so unbelievable. A 10-year-old child is a paramedic? Let's suspend disbelief. But during that sequence, they showed the same child with 2 or possibly 3 different hair lengths and 4 different pairs of shoes in what was meant to be a sequence filmed in one day, which immediately makes you realize, even without documentary making experience, that this was not filmed in the same day. Or if it was, he had a shoe trailer like Imelda Marcos and a hairdresser on set for a quick haircut. So the BBC was shown gradually to have made many, many mistakes in this film. They also...
Would that just be the implication being that this wasn't really following a day in the footsteps of this paramedic child? It was actually every now and then, let's get him in there and pretend he's been there the whole time. He wasn't actually there.
Correct. And there were other problems as well. I'll come back to him in a moment, because that's a very important feature that I think was a technical failing. So removing any kind of ideology, this in and of itself should have been a red flag to the BBC and to the producers that they had manipulated documentary footage in an entirely unjustifiable way. I mean, it's sort of journalism or documentary or current affairs 101 not to use non-sequential editing, certainly to that extent that you're using footage from different events and different days and pretending it is from one day. So there may be some explanation that I haven't thought of where he does have a quick haircut in the middle of the day. I mean, let's give them that benefit of the doubt, though I think it's unlikely. But the BBC, some years ago, I wrote it in my column in The Spectator, got in a lot of trouble when they made a trailer for a film following Queen Elizabeth II. And they showed a scene in the trailer where she stormed out of a photo shoot with Annie Leibovitz, the world famous photographer, and had a tantrum. And there was a big controversy because actually the angry footage they've used of the Queen was actually from before the photo shoot. So that never happened. Heads rolled. Peter Fincham, I believe, was fired or resigned from the BBC as a result. This happened in a matter of hours and days. They held one of these BBC investigations, pages long report on how it happened. And yet when the Gaza documentary did the same and much worse in platforming the son of a Hamas terrorist as the narrator of the film, they dragged their heels. At first, they said, well, we didn't know he was the son of this Hamas guy. We'll put an extra caption up at the beginning. But there was no reason that would be a problem. We had full editorial control. They then eventually agreed that they didn't have full editorial control. The production company did, and they threw the production company under the bus. And then eventually, when faced with further evidence of journalistic malpractice and deception, which was that they mistranslated much of the Arabic. They translated the word Yahud, Jew, to Israeli, when they talked about waging jihad on the Yahud. They translated it as resistance against the Israeli forces or similar, effectively whitewashing the anti-Semitic genocidal nature of Hamas and Palestinian ethos. At that point, they pulled the film from iPlayer, but not before they'd broadcast it, I think, twice on the television. They'd left it up on iPlayer for people to see. Typical BBC reaction. They denied, they obfuscated, they dug their heels in, they pretended that anyone that said something about it was wrong. 500 lovies signed a letter saying that it was racist to question these things and it should be put up again. And in actual fact, this is a massive scandal for the BBC. This is a low point. This, I think, has left their reputation in absolute tatters, what was left of it, for anyone that follows their bias and lies and twisting and manipulation about Israel. And that's the real problem, is it actually highlights something many of us have known about for years. It's quite possible all those scenes of the child paramedic are acted. There is a phenomenon known as Pallywood, where the Palestinians have for many years acted and made up scenes which they know will play well in the Western world, often using children to elicit sympathy and pity. This is not to say there isn't suffering in Gaza, that life isn't difficult at times for Palestinians. But often they rely on this credulous Western media, epitomized by the BBC, to just spew this stuff out verbatim. It's given to them, footage of a child reporter or a child paramedic, and they put it out as if it's gospel truth without questioning the peculiarity of a 10 or 11-year-old child being a volunteer paramedic, of paramedics not moving that child aside because he's not actually helpful or because it's traumatic to him to see the victims of a bombing, who then becomes a journalist's assistant in the evening in the same sequence, and then an ambulance cleaner that evening, a child of 10 or 11. It's beyond belief that responsible current affairs executives, documentary makers, even runners in that show should believe that. And I think it's a mixture of deliberate obfuscation and manipulation and credulousness, that they've been so primed to believe that everything Israel does is evil and that everything the Palestinians do is purely pure and innocent. And in a film that didn't show one Hamas fighter or terrorist, one gun, rocket or bomb, we're meant to have believed that was a fair representation of children's lives in Gaza. The BBC has failed massively here, and it really needs to do more than just a perfunctory bureaucratic exercise in internal investigation. Heads don't just need to roll. They need to overhaul their entire news treatment of Israel. It's something we've known they have a massive bias on for decades. They have a bias. They have editors and journalists and reporters who have a hatred of Israel.
There was that Telegraph report, wasn't there? 1,500 times the BBC had gone against, what was it, regulations in the biased reporting against
There have been
Israel.
so many reports. I myself have spent years documenting and investigating BBC failings, and from BBC Arabic, their Arabic language service, which is even worse than their English language service on this topic, to their English coverage, they are a mixture of believing of obvious falsities to deliberately, in my opinion, pushing out lies and untruths. And I think that that has to end. They are our national broadcaster. So many Jewish people and non-Jewish people are now withholding their license fee payments because the idea that somebody is spewing out pro-Palestinian, pro-terrorist, pro-Hamas propaganda to a beautiful soundtrack of emotional music, manipulating abused children to spread that message with our money, is disgusting. It's unacceptable. And that is a threat of criminal proceedings. If you don't pay your license fee, you can go to court. You can be fined. That's outrageous. They need to stand on their own feet. If they want to make this bile, they should make it and see how it floats commercially. They should not be doing this in our name or with our pounds.
Perhaps it's easier to believe that a 10-year-old might be a paramedic in a culture where a 10-year-old can get married. How did Owen Jones react to the pulling of the documentary?
I can't say I've looked. I don't spend a lot of time following him. I would imagine he thought it was not right to do so. Do you know how he?
Yeah, he was not happy.
Okay.
So as you can imagine, he said all the things.
The thing is, let me say this, right? It's not about what you think about Israel. Even if you don't like Israel's behavior in this war, to make a documentary that is demonstrably going against the rules of fair journalism, so non-sequential editing, hiding the identity of a child who's connected to Hamas through his family, through his father. They've now admitted they made payments to that child's family into the sister's bank account for his mother. Now, that in and of itself, I'm not an accountant, but if you brought me a transaction like that, I'd say, what are you trying to hide? The idea that license fee payers' money has potentially gone to people connected with Hamas.
You're never supposed to pay interviewees for documentaries.
Well, they said in the end that they paid him for the narration. And even that then revealed that if they paid him for the narration, it's because he was performing a role as an actor. And we knew that because his narration was clearly recorded in a recording studio somewhere in Gaza and was clearly scripted. He talked about things which were not in what they today call his lived experience. He had factual information which was not from his perspective. He talked about the lives of the other characters in the film who we don't think he met. So he was then paid for that role. So my point here is that it broke so many rules of how you make documentaries and films and current affairs pieces that just on that basis, it should have been pulled. For 500 people like Gary Lineker and the like, to say that this film should be put back and that these criticisms are racist is obviously moronic. And those people should assess their own biases because they need to ask why, in the case of a film trashing the Jewish state, Israel, they're happy for all those things to happen. But probably in another case, they wouldn't be. I mean, I was on the radio the other day. They had Juliet Stevenson, the actress, saying that it was wrong and it should be put up and it should be put back on the air. And I just don't understand how she didn't think, for example, it was a problem to have a Hamas guy's son narrate the whole film. I bet she would have a problem if the BBC showed a film with a conservative MP's child narrating the whole film on a contentious political issue where they don't tell you that it is a conservative MP's child. But when it came to Hamas, a prescribed genocidal, anti-Semitic, brutal, medieval, backwards terrorist organization, that was fine.